For everyone just joining, welcome to today's webinar, Why Hiring Engineers is Still Broken in 2025. These engineering leaders today are going to walk us through how that happened and some things that they've done to fix it, adapt, thrive in some cases through the chaos. So let's get started with introductions. Robert, how about you go first?
Sure. I'm Robert Gonzalez, VP of Engineering for SugarCRM. Um, been involved in engineering or technical product development for a little over 2 decades. And I've been a hiring manager for about 10 years.
Awesome. How about Ed?
Yeah, I'm Ed St. Louis. I'm a director of engineering at Lendio. Prior to Lendio, I was a VP of engineering at Zima Software for a lot of years. So I've done been in software for over 20 years, done a lot of hiring and staffing and whatnot in the last decade. So
And Anant.
Hi, I'm Anant. I'm a fractional CTO, head of engineering, but previously I was SVP of engineering and data science. That included health. Prior to that, I led engineering organizations both at Uber and LinkedIn. I'm actually really excited to talk about this topic, mostly because I'm on the other side right now too, of looking at what that looks like. And so it's been super fun and fascinating, but largely done lots of hiring on the for engineers in the past.
Awesome. And I'm your host, Matt McClintock. I also come from an engineering background, but now I'm wearing my host hat. Host the Tech Teams Today podcast, which this webinar is an offshoot of. So we do webinars roughly every month, where we get multiple engineering leaders on sort of a virtual panel, as opposed to the podcast, which is one guest at a time, to sort of pick a topic that really resonates with engineering leaders and get sort of three different perspectives, or four if you count mine, um, and sort of dive deep into that. So, with that, let's get started on the first topic, which is a lot of you have probably noticed there are a lot of applications for every single engineering role that is posted right now, and not a lot of great ones, which requires hiring managers, engineering leaders to go through a lot of applications that, for the most part, are not super high quality. So, I'm gonna start with Ed. What percentage of the applications that you get would you say are actually qualified for the job they're applying for?
so if I jump ahead and give you a percentage first, then I'll explain it. So I'd say 10%, less than 10% are actually qualified. There's a lot
Wow.
of noise when we post a job position. And I would say 2/3 of our inbound applicants are immediately disqualified because they aren't local. We specifically put in our posting that we're looking for people willing to do hybrid work, and we will get applications from people around the world. So I can quickly filter those ones out to get it down to about a third of where we were at. But then there's a whole bunch of others that really aren't qualified to the specifications that we posted in our job description. Either they're, not familiar with the tech stack we're looking for, they're a junior engineer and we're looking for a senior, those types of things. And that whittles it down to about 10% of the resumes are actually people we'd want to investigate
Oh, that's terrifying. Um,
more.
um, Robert, how about you? What are you seeing over at Sugar?
I'm pretty much the same story that Ed just told. We've had a couple of postings that we put out lately. Ours is we post hybrid listings for our various GCCs around the world. We are very explicit about where that role is located and the fact that we want people that can be in the office a few days a week in those areas. And out of the first intake that we see, I would say a solid 3 out of 4 are coming from a geolocation outside of the country, not just outside of the location, but outside of the country. Um, from there, once you get whittled down to your list of candidates that might fit the bill location wise, You have to figure out who actually fits the bill based on the content of the job description and the skills and experience that is coming in from the candidate. And that makes it a bit of a challenge as well. So basically everything Ed said, I've experienced the same thing. I would say my numbers are very closely aligned. I'd say 8 to 10% are probably qualified candidates out of the entire pool.
And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with AI and automation. Um, I'm curious what you guys are seeing around that. Like, there's no one individual. I feel like probably that 90% of unqualified people are not people actually taking the time to fill out an application, look at the JD, and think, "Oh, I'm definitely qualified for this role," right? There's definitely like bots and AI and automation like in the mix there. Um, what are you guys doing to try and like fix that? Like filter out the noise, so to speak. Um, Ed, we'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, so I mean, it starts with trying to be explicit in people to be in the office. Don't meet that criteria. Again, those are easy to throw out, but it's hard to tell if they were submitted or the applications were submitted by a bot. I would guess that a lot of them are, especially the ones that are not local to where our office is located. Um, as for, whether or not they used a bot or a service to beef up their application, um, I've seen that, a lot of people will look good on paper on their resume, and it'll say, hey, they're an expert in the exact tech stack that we're looking for in our job description. But then if you actually get them on the phone and talk to them, they don't live up to the expectations of what they said. So I think there are people that are using AI to enhance their resumes and target them directly for our job descriptions on occasion, because I've seen that several times where I'll talk to somebody and they do not live up to the expectations of what they said on their resume.
Yeah, and that is increasingly easier now. Robert, what are you guys doing over at Sugar?
So we don't have a solution to that problem just yet. We're seeing the same effects. We had one posting that went up, and I think within 24 hours we had something like 400 or 500 submissions that came in against it. That's an inhuman number of applications to come in against a recent job posting, right? And I know that there's an uptick in automations and services that are being sold to candidates. It's one of those things where you give us your resume, we'll do all the hard work. We'll use AI to tailor your resume and your cover letter for the job. We'll send it for you. Um, to be clear, I'm not an opponent of using AI to dress up your resume. I am definitely an opponent of what Ed was talking about, where somebody makes their resume sound like the job description, only to get on a phone call and have no clue what it is they're talking about. That does create noise at a different stage of the process. Um, but even that one, there's not really a solution for that one other than investing the time into weeding that out. On the front end of it, though, a couple of things that I think we're pursuing is, your ATSs that you use and the systems that you use to take your inbounds. You can configure those to be a filter for you to some degree. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but you can filter with your ATS out of the gates. Then you can also have other criteria that your inbound system can run to try to ditch some of the things that you know are outliers or are incorrect. As an example, I told you we had a job posting where we had like 400 or 500 applicants in the first 24 hours. By the end of the week, I think we were up to like 2,000. And what ended up happening was we were able to use our systems internally, and I'm sure there was some human intervention here too, to drive that list of like 2,000 candidates down to I think it was 100. That's significant, but it's also a lot of work, takes a lot of time. And then that 100 was one where we had to actually put people's eyeballs on resumes and look for those things that stand out to you, to get down to a list of perhaps 20 that you want to talk to on the phone, to get down to a list of perhaps 5 that you actually want to interview for the role.
Yeah, and on the flip side, so Anant, and I can relate here. I remember after I left my last company, I literally didn't touch a computer for 6 months. Anant just had a similar experience. Um, then I come back to LinkedIn and I'm looking at LinkedIn job postings, and it's like gives you these alerts like, "Ooh, this job just got posted. It's like a perfect match for you." And they're like, "Oh, it just got posted like 2 hours ago. Cool." And then you look at it and there's like 10,000 people have applied for this job in the last 2 hours. And you're like, well, why even bother? Just like the rule of large numbers. There's no way. Um, are you seeing that today or not? Like, how are you dealing with this on the other side of the
Yeah.
equation?
Yeah, I mean, this is super interesting for me as a problem because I think about this in terms of what's your incentive and what's your incentive structure, right? Because I can imagine when I was the hiring manager, like a candidate has nothing to lose by applying. And generally, you want people to apply for jobs because you kind of go through this. Now, I think one thing that's changed is with COVID and people being much more comfortable with remote, people are like, yeah, I'll take a shot and maybe I'll get a remote offer or something like that. So the location piece that both Robert and Ed talked about is very true. I saw this even at Included. Now, on the flip side, what I do see is this fear, if you were to say, is like the biggest fear I think a fear that a hiring manager has is a bad candidate with a good resume. And a fear a recruiter has is a good candidate with a bad resume. And I think AI has sort of automated a lot of this stuff in a way that actually I think what Robert and Ed both talked about, it's actually kind of problematic. Now, as a candidate on the other side, like I think you kind of feel, at least from my perspective, it's this notion of like it's a black hole of sorts. Do you apply? What does that look like? And I think in this market, actually referrals are much stronger than before. And I again think a lot about this, which is like what's happening at the macro level in market, which is tech companies are not hiring as aggressively. I think we have an influx of AI, but we also have an influx of talent in this world who had like, and I keep thinking about this for like 20, 30 years ago, we had far fewer CS graduates than we do today. CS or computer science has become such a more popular major, and you have a lot more of these programs coming in. And so I think to that end, you're also seeing a massive influx of people. So the supply demand curve is off. And so I think referrals are a great way in this space where if you know someone who will refer you in, I think you would at least get a good conversation out of it. So that would be my advice on the other side for folks. But I also think as hiring managers, like I used to put a lot of weight in referrals, especially when the person referring them was someone who was also very talented in the organization. Now, I do know referrals do create some biases because people like you having like it disproportionately people who are minorities in an organization, and so they don't have a solution there. But spectrum of large amounts of volume, referrals is a great way to get through.
Yeah, I think you're right for sure. I think there's another side of it is too many company startup. Like someone joins a company, almost Trojan horses their way in, and then refers a bunch of people they used to work with, and then like brings that company basically to the new company. And then there's almost like a company within a company, and it's like, oh, well, we used to sell it to this industry or market to this industry or build this type of product, and then they like kind of try and influence the new company they're working at with that. So I think it's like referrals on the candidate side are definitely good. They're good on the employer side too. It's just I would caution people not to hire too many people from that come from the same company, or else there are upsides to it. Like, yeah, it's nice to have a bunch of people who used to work together. But if you got to caution against forming a company within a company as a result of that.
Yeah, I
Um,
think the point you're making, which I agree with you on, which is that you want to have a diversity of thought within the organization where you don't have
yeah,
groupthink. And it's true, right? Like people from different backgrounds, different experiences will bring on different insights, which will help improve the organization. So I agree with you there. Now, I have seen cases where I think when we were at Uber, we hired a lot of people from Google and Facebook, and like that was that group of folks. Like And I think some of that showed up. Now, again, it's also a matter of how big your company is and things like that. But generally, I do agree with you, Matt, in this notion of you want to make sure the people you bring on end up helping improve the organization as a whole.
Yeah. And on the topic of LinkedIn, going back to let's go back with Ed. Are you guys posting jobs on LinkedIn? Have you seen a drop off in quality in LinkedIn job postings as sort of like a result of all this sort of automated job applications?
Yeah, so we're still using it, and we do get candidates, both good quality and bad quality from it. But as Anant was just talking about, we definitely put a lot of weight behind referrals. We've also been doing more of like a hunting approach, where instead of just looking at applicants, we kind of do our own search on LinkedIn for specific types of people and reach out to them proactively and see if they'd be interested, which has resulted in a couple of good hires. For the most part, though, we are just accepting what we get from LinkedIn, weeding out the obviously spam, obviously bot applicants that aren't, because we're not hiring for a remote role. It's makes it a lot easier to just immediately rule out anybody who's not close to the office and go from there.
Robert, how about you?
So we're still using LinkedIn, among other sources. We also have our careers page that posts our open listings there. So I think we're seeing, in terms of the LinkedIn quality of postings, um, from what we're sharing, our content stays the same. What we ask for stays the same. What we see coming in from LinkedIn is vast. I think we get a lot more inbounds from LinkedIn and from other, job boards and things like that, because obviously there's people that have their automations set up there. When it comes to referrals, we favor referrals a lot as well, particularly if they come from people within the company that have a solid history with the company. If you've been with the company 3, 4 years, you're a solid performer, you're a talented person, and you say, "Hey, I know somebody who's in this space that I've worked with for years in the past." That carries a lot of weight with it, right? It makes it easy for us to sort of float that to the top. Um, that's not always easy in a global hiring situation, right? Like we have offices and positions in the United States, in the UK, in Eastern Europe, in the APAC area, some in LATAM area. So as we build out in those areas, we'll eventually build out our referral network too internally. But um, if we get good referrals, we tend to favor those ones. In terms of the services that we use, though, yeah, we put our stuff out on most of the popular job boards to get as many candidates as we can for those.
I'm curious what LinkedIn is doing. I'm sure they're doing something to sort of fix or mitigate this issue with the spam applicants. Because I mean, how could you have 10,000 people apply for a job in 2 hours? I mean, it seems very unlikely. Um, so moving on to another topic I've read a lot about. I'm curious if you guys have actually experienced any of this, but fake candidates, which is hilarious. I'm not really quite sure what the end goal is there. So AI candidates basically that are like avatars and can do pretty decently in interviews, um, and AI assisted interview cheating. So I'll just start by generally asking, Ed, have you encountered either of those things in your hiring process?
With fake candidates, I mean, there's obviously kind of the spammy applicants we immediately rule out. So I don't know how fake they really are or not. But as I mentioned earlier, we have had some instances where someone looks really good on paper, and then you talk to them over the phone or on a Zoom, and you immediately realize that what they had put in their resume was an exaggeration or a lie. So in that case, if you call them fake candidates, I'd say those are fake candidates. As for AI assisted interviews, we bring people into the office for the in-depth interviews live. So if they want to, have their AI assistant open on their laptop, we'd see them doing that and take that into consideration, right? Like I wouldn't forbid them from using an AI because they're going to be able to use that
Right.
as an engineer with the team. But if we ask them a question and they have to consult their computer to answer us, like that's going to tell us something.
Yes. And what if someone doesn't use an AI-based code editor? Like, what kind of signal do you take from that?
What do you mean?
Like, let's say someone just opened up, like, someone comes in for an interview and just opens like blank Sublime, blank screen, doesn't use an AI-based code editor, like, and says they don't. Like, what kind of signal would you take away from that?
Oh, just like in their work, they're not using AI
Yeah,
currently.
yeah,
I mean, that's a data point. Um, I think people should be willing to use new technology. I mean, we're in the technology space. So if they haven't been playing with what's available, I would be concerned.
right.
But but that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Most
I
people
ask because
don't
I've
experiment
heard
with it.
I only ask because I actually have heard of, there are still some engineers out there that like refuse to try out Cursor or Windsurf or Copilot or things like that. And I'm like, really? Like, why
Think
wouldn't?
that would be a showstopper. Like right now,
Yeah.
my expectation as an engineering leader is that my team is going to use all of the tools and technology at their disposal to do the work that we need to do. I think anybody that's been in tech for more than 6 months now knows that the pace that we're working at is rapid. The demands are higher. Our ability to prototype is faster. And rather than coming to the table with documents and pictures and sketches, we're actually coming to the table with prototypes and we're telling engineering teams, turn this into reality, right? Make this vibe coded, YOLO coded thing an actual production ready type thing. Um, if we aren't using the rapid development tools at our disposal, we're literally bringing the business down. We're moving the business backwards. So my expectation would be if I talk to an engineer on an interview and I give them a technology challenge that I want them to solve, I want to see the fullness of their workflow. And what I mean by that, in the old ways of doing things, we might present a code challenge and whiteboard the session, right? And as we're whiteboarding, we're talking to the engineer, we're asking them, speak the things that are coming into your mind. I want to hear your thought process. I want to see what you're doing. I don't need your code to be dialed in, but I do want your logic to be dialed in. So that part is still fullness of the process. The other bit though is how might I then use that logic in my AI tools, whether it's a chat agent or a type ahead type thing or something similar to like a Copilot or even as deep as a Claude Code where I might want to fire up my CLI tool and tell my agent, here's what I'm looking for to get me off the ground. Start this for me. Give me my boilerplate and I'll go from there. If my candidates aren't doing that, I believe they're already going to be slowing down the process that they're going to be fitting into.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can understand why someone wouldn't. I understand developers who are kind of set in their way and they've been doing things a certain way for a certain amount of time. But even then, it's like, we're years into this now. It's not like
Yeah.
Chat GPT or these tools just came out a few months ago. So
Yeah.
I can
The
maybe,
piece, yeah, the piece
yeah,
here I would
go
say is
ahead.
like I think there's a spectrum, right? Like I think about you can pick people's adoption curve and like yeah, there are folks who are probably not there. But I think a vast majority of people are actually quite excited to use it. I think where I see that distinction is how effective are they in their usage of this? Where it's not just the prompt, it's like how do they break down the problem and how do they think about those things? And I actually am curious, Robert or Ed, like how you guys interview for that skill. Because I feel like you can write that prototype, what have you, but it's how someone breaks down the problem and says, hey, go, I know I need to solve this big thing. I'm going to break it into these small 5 components. I'm going to write prompts individually to cover that. And I think that skill actually is super tricky to sometimes assess in an interview. But I think generally speaking, I would expect most, if not all, candidates are aware of Cursor, Replit, or what have you, Cloud Code and Codex and things like that.
So, I mean,
Yeah,
I,
I
I
was
was
gonna
just gonna
say
say
let's I
I
was gonna
can
say let's go to
respond.
Ed.
I can respond first since he called us out. We don't dive into it too deeply, but we do ask the candidates that come in as we're interviewing, like, what tools have you used? What have you found that's effective and not effective? And kind of get their perspective on it. Because if people haven't used the AI tools, then they won't have much of an opinion on how effective it is and what they use it for and what it's good at and those types of things. So we can usually tell just with easy conversation whether or not they have been using tools and making use of them and getting value out of them, and that'll tell us that, like, okay, they know what they're doing here, and we kind of move on.
Yep. So we do similar things, but that part actually becomes dependent upon the role that we're trying to hire for. For example, a junior engineer, my expectation on a junior engineer is that they're not going to have the practical skills necessary to break down a larger problem to the depth that we might have a senior or staff engineer do, right? When you go and you talk to a senior level engineer and you give them a nebulous problem, one of the first things they do is they grope for clarity, and then they take that clarity and they break it down into chunks, consumable chunks. You talk to a junior engineer, oftentimes you give them a nebulous problem. The first thing they do is they turn to their code editor and start coding, right? It's a slightly different setup depending upon who you're talking to. One of the questions that I've asked in the past and even recently is, what is your workflow? If you're given a problem, what is your workflow? And from that conversation, you can take that to, okay, here's a problem for you. And generally, I keep those problems that I present in interviews. I start off nebulous because I want to see what they do with that. If you bring forward an unclear task, and their first response is, let me get clarity, you're already taking a step in the right direction, right? You give them some clarity. If their next step from there is, hang on a minute, let me see if I can ask for a breakdown from one of my AI tools. And then they go into their AI tool and they say, or they even say first, here's what I'm thinking. Now let me verify that with my AI tool. They throw that into their AI tool, they get that breakdown, and they're like, okay, I was close, I wasn't close, whatever that looks like. Using that whole AI-driven workflow through their entire setup, to me, is what is really the biggest game changer. As much as I love AI coding tools, the coding bit of what engineers do is such a small part of all the work we do. When we're planning, when we're communicating, when we're diagramming, when we're architecting, like even when we're documenting, right? Like none of that is code. So as much as I want the AI coding bits, I want the AI workflow. And so I ask my candidates, what is your workflow? And then let's walk you through that workflow with a problem. Let's see how it applies here. And if you can fit into that, then that makes you in my opinion, a viable candidate to move to the next step.
And now on the topic of interviews, sort of what are your favorite interview questions, and what are let's start with that, and then I'll move on to the next part. So Robert, what's your favorite interview question?
Pick on me. So check it out. As a VP, I don't hire engineers much anymore. I validate them. So what happens is my managers, my hiring managers, they go through the process. They have their teams do the technical componentry of the interview. When I interview, it's actually much less of a technical interview, much more of a conversation. I check for vibe, I check for fit, I check for culture, I check for their ability to communicate effectively with me when I ask them questions. And most of my questions are situational, not technical in nature. I have two questions that are my favorites. I'll give them both to you in a second. So for anybody who's on the call, you're getting some inside baseball here because both of these usually catch people off guard pretty hard. The one question I ask of everybody, that this is in engineering and non-engineering alike, is without any context. That means no work, no school, no anything. You go back to the farthest that you can remember to this morning. What in your mind, when I say the word failure, what is your most memorable failure? It's a two-part question, actually. The first part is I'm looking for vulnerability, I'm looking for honesty, I'm looking for what you think is a failure versus what might be an actual failure. Um, and from there, if you don't answer it in that response, I ask you, given the situation again, given what you know now, what would you do to prevent that failure from happening again? That actually measures the learning from a failure, not making the same mistake twice, understanding the scope and nature of that failure. So that's my very favorite question, and it is one that catches a lot of people off guard because most people don't think in that context, right? And then a question that I heard the other day that I'm stealing because it's such a fantastic question. What kind of kid were you? Sounds basic, but were you an explorer? Were you curious? Were you a tinkerer? Were you the kid that sat in the corner with his iPad in front of his face? Like what were you as a child? Like as a young person, what kind of kid were you? Because that the question then becomes, okay, how do you align with that now? Did any of that part of you change over time, or are those characteristics still part of the person that I'm talking to right now? Because a lot of those characteristics might be what I'm looking for, right?
That's
So
a
I know
great,
that wasn't
that's a great,
wasn't a
that's a
technical
great.
answer, but those are my questions.
Well, I'm curious on the failure question. Is that like all encompassing, like for your entire life? Is that what you're
Yes,
asking them? Okay.
yes.
Wow.
And I
That's
I can
fair.
tell you, I'll give you a little bit more inside baseball. If you ever have a chance to interview with me and I ask that question, particularly for junior engineers who might be watching this, if you answer that question with, I got a C in my chemistry class as a senior and I was disappointed, that's not the right answer. That's not what I'm looking for. There are I've had a slew of answers to that question that have really impressed me. Um, None of them were related to school. If your first thought is I'm going to talk about how I flubbed an exam or I didn't do a group project right. That's not what I'm looking for. So, but the context of that really is how hard can you think about what you've been through in life and how vulnerable can you be with me in that moment? I do preface that with like this isn't going to extend beyond here. I'm not recording. I'm not sharing this with anybody. Um, because the vulnerability is important. And when we make a mistake, we need to be able to go and talk with our leadership about it. We need to talk to our team about it. And then we need to be able to learn from it and show how we're going to learn from it. So the nature of that question is not I want to pinpoint a failure of yours so I can exclude you. It's I want to know how we move forward through those moments when we make mistakes because we all do that.
No, I think that definitely is a great question. And I think you learn much more from your mistakes than you do from your victories. Um, and I think most people would probably agree with that. I don't know, maybe not. We have two other people on the call, so let's start with, do you agree with that? And secondly, what are your favorite interview questions? Anant, you want to
Yeah.
go?
I mean, I think the question is a really good one because it engages you to be able to talk about wonderably what you've done well or not. Now, there's a part of me that's like, there are certain failures that I may not feel comfortable talking to a stranger about, and I would feel like I would struggle with it. I also grew up with a very high expectation household. So I do remember one of my failures was when I did not get an A in my math class, and like that was a unacceptable piece. But I broadly understand, Robert, what you're going for, and I think you get to know the human on the other side, which I absolutely love. And I think that's the thing that is also my questions that I usually invest in is I am trying to understand what are the values? Like why do you do the things you do? And the thing that I'm looking for is we all have a series of choices we make at any given point, and I'm looking to sort of validate the do the actions match the words? So, for example, someone will say something like, Anant, I'm really excited about the mission. And I'll then ask them, okay, cool. What companies are you looking at? And they'll be like, well, I'm looking at Included Health, which is a health company, and I really believe in this. And I'm working on this other company that the mission doesn't really match up. And so then you're trying to assess and say, like, why do your actions and why do your actions and words don't match? And that's the thing I'm looking for is there consistency? And within that, like you can look at in terms of like what are the jobs they're doing? Why do they want to work here? What motivates them? And like it's a consistent pattern because the piece that's most important for me, and much like similar to what Robert had also said, is that I'm not like interviewing someone technically, I'm validating. The piece that I'm trying to understand is how well do I know this person? Because if I truly know them and understand what motivates them, what they're interested in, what they're growing for, only then can I say this company is amazing for you or this role is amazing for you. Otherwise, I'm just doing a salesman job, which is like, let me sell you this thing, which is not the intent, which is not any of how any of us would want to bring people on. It's like, hey, like our goal is to say, like, this is a good fit. And so that's the thing that I focus a lot on is actually getting to know the individual as much as I can and look for consistencies. And in particular, what I have found is actions speak louder than words in a very real way, especially when you talk about a candidate, both in terms of their past as well as the future, which is why I love Robert's question of like, what were you like as a kid? And like, what are some things that have changed? Because it, again, points to what are the actions that sort of they may have taken as part of that. So someone would say is like, look, I was very introverted, but now I'm very extroverted. Why did that change? What happened and what led you to that? So, which is why I think it's a really cool question to ask.
Yeah, I want to dig into that question with Robert offline for sure. Ed, what about you? What's your favorite interview question?
So I have
Could be
been
two.
doing maybe two. So I've
Could
been
be two.
doing a lot of technical like questions, right? Because I'm taking these candidates for their first interview here in the office, and we're going into a room for an hour, and we're talking through a lot of stuff. And what I've come to really like doing is, based on, their history, their work history, picking something, whether that be a recent project they worked on, and just dive deep into it and see how detailed they can be, right? I want to understand, like, okay, this was a project you worked on. Tell me about it. Like, what problems did you run into? And then kind of based on their responses, dive deeper and deeper into very specific things that they worked on, they did, they resolved, they got wrong, they got right, to make sure that they actually did do the work, if that makes sense, and they weren't just on a team that did the work and they just did this little piece that, they don't understand how it all fits together. We typically hire senior engineers for the most part. We hire very few junior engineers, and so we want people that can really understand problems, understand how the whole system works, understand architecture. And if they're not able to get detailed on the things that they worked on, that's usually a red flag right there. I also like asking, problems where I present a problem to them, right? Here's a problem. What might you do? And I just want to see how they break things down, ask clarifying questions, understand what needs to be done, and then, where would I look to try and resolve this issue and just see their thought process in breaking down problems. I know that's kind of a traditional thing that a lot of people do in interviews, and you can learn a lot about a person by how they break down problems and how they might go about fixing things.
Yeah, you definitely don't want the kind of developer who, like Robert said, you give them this huge problem and they immediately go to their code editor, right?
Yeah.
Like you want someone who's
It's
gonna
like
like take
I haven't even given you all the requirements yet. Like you gotta
right.
ask for them.
Yeah, the thing is like vibe coding is a big thing now, right? So, but we're not going to talk about vibe coding today. Please no. Um, but on a different topic. Okay, I thought Robert was going to cut in with some vibe coding. All right. Have you guys cut back on take homes and lead code style challenges because of AI and how easy it would be to cheat on those sort of traditional interview hiring?
I'd like to take that one, and this is going to be a different answer to the question you're asking. So we actually did take home assignments and like small project assignments as part of the process a few years back, and that yielded. This was before the AI era, really, but it yielded strange results in that we would give candidates an instruction of, hey, here's a project we want you to solve. Go solve this in any way you want to, and let us know how much time you spent on it while you were doing it, right? It's a very honor system type thing. And what we found with a lot of our candidates is, and this is typical of engineers, right? When they start working on a problem, they go head down and they just work on it and work on it and work on it and work on it. Where we would give a candidate a thing that we thought was about a 4 hour piece of work would turn into like a 12 to 15 hour piece of work because they got so into it that they would go and want to solve all the problems and then invent some things of their own, right? You give them a very clear problem set. Here's what we want. And they come back with a full solution. um, that actually wasn't what we were after. And because it wasn't what we were after, we actually pulled the plug on that. And what we ended up doing was shifting the way that we interview generally to rather than a take home that gets you in the door and then going individual um, panel type interviews, is we do pair interviews now. We'll take a senior engineer and a junior together, or a senior engineer and another senior, and we'll put them on a call with the candidate or in a room with the candidate, and they will give them a problem to solve, and they'll ask the candidate to work through that problem with them live, and they'll throw challenges along the way. They'll raise things that weren't known before to see how the candidate adapts to that change, how they adapt to a new requirement, or whether they think of things like scale or adaptability or extensibility along the way, um, without really building anything, just to kind of see what the candidate's take on it is. So that take home assessment bit, that wasn't a success for us. This was even before AI. Right now, I expect people to use AI for everything they're doing. I also expect them to know their stuff though. So if you, and that was one of the things we did get from the take home was we would actually do a review and we would ask them, what was your logical choice here? Why did you do this? Just like a general code review. So my expectation now is if I was to give you an assignment like that, I would expect you to use AI. And then I would expect that I should be able to ask you questions with no computer, no phone around, none of your code around, and you be able to explain to me why you did what you did. So that's kind of the trade-off to where we're at right now is if you can explain to me what you're doing without the need of a computer in your face, that tells me that at least a little bit that you know what you're talking about.
Ed, how about you?
So, very, very similar, eerily similar to Robert. We used to do take-home kind of projects that we'd give our candidates, and then after they completed it, we'd do either a phone interview or an in-office interview where we would kind of go over their solution, ask them questions about it. But what we found is they would spend so much extra time on this project building elaborate solutions and things like that that they were just, overkill from what we wanted, because I think they wanted to impress us. And um, so we weren't getting exactly what we wanted out of that. And what we also found is it was a turnoff in our application process to an extent, right? Because we were giving them like a real world scenario that we deal with daily. And like, here's a problem that we solve on the regular here. We want to give you a taste of what it's like to work here. So work on this problem for us. And so I think that put a bad taste in some of the candidates' mouths as well as, oh, they just want us to solve their problems for them, or this is hard to do and I can't do this everywhere I'm interviewing. And so as we got into more of, I think probably 2021, 2022, when hiring devs was harder, we kind of nixed well, it doesn't make sense to give them that difficult of a problem or something that they're going to commit several hours to doing when we can ask them some questions in an interview and get a good sense of how they can program in just a few minutes. And so we kind of dropped the whole take-home project completely, and then focused more on let's solve this problem together. Let's write some pseudocode on the whiteboard and just make sure they could understand how to break down a problem, how they make sure they were able to write some pseudocode, right? Like it felt familiar to them, like this is how I would loop through and this is, my function or whatever. Make sure that they did know what they were talking about live.
So we have 15 minutes, but I just noticed we have a couple questions from the audience, so I want to get these in for sure. I know, Ed, you don't hire remote, so I'm gonna throw this one to Anant and Robert. Um, so this one's from Julie Sheffield. We're hiring for remote positions, which adds another layer of challenge. What can you tell from a remote interview whether someone is using AI to answer technical screening questions?
Um, so we at Included definitely did remote hiring because Included hired remote engineers. It's actually one of the few companies that did that, which is really cool. So I was having a conversation with someone there, or actually one of my other friends at a different company. They were telling me the same similar story, which is you can tell like if they're slow at responding, like there is still a lag that happens. One person actually yesterday at a dinner, I was talking to them and they were telling me a scenario where basically they started seeing patterns, like the video quality was bad, and they would ask him a question and they would all repeat, like, oh, so what you want me to do is do A, B, and C. Okay. And that was just buying them time to be able to respond more effectively. The honest answer is like to some degree you can't tell, right? Like, I mean, it's just in the past, what people used to do was, hey, let's screen share together, and they would like you could see their screen and what have you. Um, I think that's probably the closest thing you have. I don't have a great way of telling someone you can't do this. Now, I do think it will get I mean, I do know AI will get better and better and better, right? There's a company called Cluely, which the whole motto of this company is to say cheat on everything. And so like there is going to be some elements of this, but my hope is I think it's a cat and mouse game. So much like I think how we talked about, there's AI to generate resumes, there's also AI to review resumes. I am sure there will be better and newer technology that will come to this. Like I think it'll balance itself out. But in the most near term, I think you're looking for signals like either delay in responses, video quality issues, um, or certain patterns that they are continually repeating as a means to validate.
So
Robert?
what Anant was saying, I actually had an experience like this years ago before AI was so vastly available to everybody. I was interviewing a junior candidate, and as I was talking to him, he told me right out of the gates that his camera on his computer was over here, and he wanted to have this big screen in front of him for coding. So the whole conversation was like this. And as I would ask him a question, he would always respond with, "That's yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I've had some experience with that at some point in the past, but if I heard you correctly, this is what you want." And that 8 to 10 seconds was all it took for him to Google answers. And I actually caught that vibe that you can hear the clicking and the clacking as I'm asking questions, and he was literally cheating with Google at the time. In today's era, there isn't really a clean, valid way to assess whether or not your candidate is being honest with you on the call. There's a couple of things you can do that might put you in the driver's seat a little bit. One of the things that I do with my phone screens when I there is a technical component to my phone screens is actually I've introduced this thing years ago called the lightning round. And what I do is I fire off questions and I tell the candidate, you don't have any time to respond to this. You don't have time to think, and please don't ask for clarifying questions. I'm going to ask you a question. What does REST mean? How would you go about building a weighted API response router, right? Those kinds of things where I want your response right now. If you can't do that right now, then either you don't know your stuff or you need help with it that is beyond what I would expect of you to have. One other thing I have done once before, it was a little bit uncomfortable at the time, but I actually asked the candidate, can you sit back in your chair for me real quick and answer this question for me? Because it's really hard for somebody to type with their hands out all the way in order to answer that question. It does make for a slightly awkward situation, but that was a candidate that I was not confident was actually being honest with me, and turns out they weren't. So again, there's some little things that you can do, but I don't think you're ever going to get rid of the notion that people might be using assistants while they're interviewing.
That lean back one was pretty interesting. Um yeah, right. Show me your hands. Um yeah. So all right, that was it on the Q&A. But if you do have questions, we have 11 minutes, so all the time in the world. Um so let's talk about what actually is working in 2025. We talked a lot about what is not working. What hiring tactics have surprised you by working better than expected? And I think this goes for everyone. So let's start with Anant.
Um, Things that are, I mean, the problem I have is I always felt like tech recruiting was always broken. Like I think we could have talked about this. Like I remember when I was at Uber, even at LinkedIn, we'd like, oh my gosh, hiring is so difficult. At Uber, we were just in this spot. We're like, oh my gosh, I could hire more. Then COVID happens, but just like, oh, remote work, what have you. So in some ways I'd like to believe I'm an optimist, but I generally feel like recruiting has always been tough trying to find the right talent. And I think underneath it is because we don't have the best way to objectively identify strong talent, right? Like, I mean, I think there was a study that found that interview performance does not oftentimes correlate to performance on the job. And similarly, what you see is if you talk to folks who are like, oh, I'm about to go interview, everyone will say, oh, I'm going to go do lead code and I'm going to go into the books and read and practice. So I think there's some elements of that that are still broken. The piece that does feel like has been working effectively, I don't know. Like I think it's just like we still are able to interview people and get people through. I mean, the things that were running through my head is like the market is also really unique right now, where I think there's this notion of job hugging where people are staying in their roles a lot longer and what have you. So you're kind of gunked up. But on the other hand, I do think what it means is your large companies are not hoarding all the tech, all the talent. Like I think in the past, probably what you had was companies like Google, Meta, just hoarded all amazing talent. Now, actually, what you're seeing is the startup scene is actually thriving. There's so many new startups, a significant amount of money that's going in. And in many ways, when I look at that, I actually get very excited for the future because I do think there's going to be some amazing talent. Not that there was not amazing talent in the past, but I think the market actually is forcing and pushing that out too, in a way that I think we'll be able to build more amazing products in the future. So that might be my answer, which is I think the market, the way it is, has meant that startups are an amazing opportunity for, and they're hiring like crazy too.
Yeah, it's more spread out, right? It's not like, oh, they all work at five companies. Um, Ed, how about you?
So there's definitely more talent looking for jobs right now, as we've been able to see from the number of applications we got, even qualified applications, which is good. We have more people to pick from than we used to. I think personal referrals are what we've relied on pretty heavily to get good candidates in that have already been vouched for by people we trust. We've already talked a little bit about that. I think the fact that we're able to focus on local hires has been super helpful in narrowing down these all of these applicants so that we can focus on people that can come into the office. I do like that in addition to the quality of candidates that we have, because of AI and kind of what we've seen here, we've been able to see a lot more candidates that are curious and interested about, things that can be built, which I think is exciting. We've gotten a lot more candidates that are curious about how they can help solve problems just because their mind has kind of been opened up to all of this. Um, all of these ideas and things that they can do because they've been using AI. They're ready to move. They're excited. They're energetic. They've kind of got that energy level that's higher than what I've seen in the past, if that makes sense.
Robert, how about you?
All right, so there's a couple of things that are working in for what we're doing right now in the process. Um, the first is the return to office interviews. When you have a person that you're talking to that's sitting right in front of you, it's a lot easier to get the whole vibe from them, right? Whether they're uncomfortable with the questions, whether they're embracing the team spirit that you have there, hearing them be able to recall from the top of their head their knowledge. So you're not worried about whether or not they know their stuff, right? That's actually been key for us in our most recent hires is actually being able to talk to a person face to face and put them through the mill of what is technical interviewing. Another thing that's working for us is we move through our process rapidly now. In the past, when we would hire, we would have a phone screen with HR, then we'd have a phone screen with the hiring manager, then we'd have a 2 or 3 person panel interview. And over the course of a week to 2 weeks, we'd run you through the ringer to determine whether or not you were the right fit. Now we're going from initial phone screen with the hiring manager to an in-person interview with a tech team with like 2 engineers for an hour, hour and a half, and then we're making a decision very quickly. So that's actually working for us. And then that decision making, one of the mantras that we follow right now, and this is part of a new leadership that has changed that has come aboard, but it's something I had never considered before, and I think it's great. When we're looking at talent, if you want to be relentless about talent and making sure you get the right people doing the right work, you ask yourself a question: is this candidate a hell yes? If they're not a hell yes, they're a hell no. I know that's a bit harsh and deterministic, but in our world right now, where there is a flood of candidates, we have our pick of the litter as hiring managers. We can be selective about who we bring onto our teams. And there are people who are going to stand out as being that hell yes. You're going to talk to them and you're going to know right from the jump. And all that they're going to do over the course of the interview is confirm for you what you already knew about them, right? So that motion for us is helping us attract talent and move quickly on it, and not lose candidates who are in the middle of the process with multiple companies and things like that. It just gives us what I feel is an advantage in our part of what we're looking for.
We just got a bunch of questions that we don't have time to answer in the next 4 minutes, but I wanted to, which one should I close with? I'll go with this. Are you changing who you're hiring? Example, are you hiring more generalists, specialists, um, senior, junior? I think I know the answer to that one. Um, how has that sort of evolved over the last year, year and a half? Let's stick with Robert.
So for us, that really hasn't changed much, except in one small differentiation. So I've been on a kick to hire junior engineers for a long time. My company has a sort of premise where we hire juniors and we work them up in our system and help them become mids, help them become seniors, some cases even move them into management if that's what they're looking to do in their career path. We haven't hired a senior engineer in a few years, just because it was actually easier for us to go and find up and coming fresh out of school or fresh out of boot camp or non-traditional background type engineers. And we've had tremendous success with that. We've had a score of really good candidates who they learned on the job and they actually became incredible engineers and were able to take that experience with them in their career as they moved on into other bigger and better things. One thing we have adjusted a little bit is we typically don't hire like front end or back end anymore. We hire full stack engineers with a broad spectrum of knowledge and skills. Because the way that we move in my company now, we have to be very nimble. And you might work on a project today that will be completely different than the project you work on tomorrow. Your tech stacks might be different. The workflow might be different. So we look for people who are adaptable and who are used to dealing with a lot of different things. Maybe not necessarily an expert in any, but very good in most. And that helps us plug you into a system in which you're going to thrive and not struggle for success.
All right, we have 2 minutes. Ed, what do you got? Anant? If you
Yeah, I
guys can
can.
keep them pretty quick so I can wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Really, what we're focusing on right now is more senior engineers than anything else, and AI has had a lot to do with that reasoning. Previously, when I was at Zima, like we focused on more entry-level engineers and would work them up into what we wanted them to be senior at the company. Um, we do target more full stack engineers. We want engineers that can jump in and help out anywhere, generalists, more so than anything else. We want people that know how to learn. We want people that communicate effectively. And that's what we're focusing on.
Anant?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much more to add. I think only thing is like I think ELC was, I believe, last week or 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
someone who attended told me it's like one of the takes there someone had is that hiring people fresh out of school is probably a better way to do it because they've been using AI in school for the last few years and they're much more familiar with it or what have you. Um, it'll be interesting. I do remember when mobile had first come up as a big thing, and you were like, we're going to hire mobile engineers. But you realized actually people who are full stack, what you needed was just good engineers who are willing to kind of roll up their sleeves, kind of like what Ed said, and just take on different problems. And I think that's been the big thing is, and what I believe is I think specialization is going to be true, but I think with AI you can also have, I think it can enable you to be much more versatile and have a much broader impact to the tech stack that you previously could.
All right. That wraps it up today. Thank you to all the panelists and thanks to all the attendees for joining. We will get to these questions we weren't able to answer today, so I will get with our panelists and get some answers over in the follow-up email. We'll also be sending the recording, posting it on YouTube, social media. So yeah, if you're an attendee now and you know other people that registered that can't make it, they will be able to check out the webinar. So thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Have a good rest of your week. And thanks for attending.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Anant. Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.